Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Happy belated 4th of July, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all had a great day yesterday and a safe one as well. Well, about 6 weeks from now or so, ladies and gentlemen, there are going to be some events taking place that could change everything for us, the Western world. But before we start, let me say thank you to the sponsor of this video, Genesis Gold Group. Everything is about to change in our world, come in about 6 weeks or so. And I wanted to take you back on a little bit of a history trip. But first, I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you, do you really think that in the past 2.5 or 3 years, that inflation, such as the government says, has only gone up about 18%? Right here it states on the government's own Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI inflation calculator that a dollar back in January of 2020 today would take $1.18. So pretty much meaning that if you wanted to buy a dollar's worth of goods back in January of 2020, today it would cost you $1.18. Do you believe that inflation has only gone up about 18% in the last 3 years? That in itself, in my opinion, 18% in the past 2.5, 3 years is a huge number. But do you believe that it's only 18%? Well, what if I were to tell you that there was a time in our history, not that long ago, to tell you the truth, when you're looking at history, back in the 1930s, where inflation went up around 65% or so. And that was after FDR revalued gold. A quick history lesson. FDR, as you all know it, Franklin D. Roosevelt, he went ahead and confiscated gold. And what he really did was he passed a couple of executive orders saying, hey, listen, you have to turn in your gold so that we can save the financial system of the United States of America. In all actuality, what he was doing was bailing out the Federal Reserve. I've talked about that on previous videos, but that's what he did. He bailed out a private institution so that they can survive. And the name of that institution is the Federal Reserve. That's why he confiscated the gold. However, he said, listen, if you don't turn in your gold, you're going to go to jail or you're going to get a fine or both. The reason that he took that gold was to bail out the Federal Reserve and then also to fund the Great New Deal. You see, in order for him to be able to fund the Great New Deal during a time where most Americans were broke, because of the policies and laws that were passed by the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve pretty much ripping off the people, he needed more money. He needed more inflation. So he took the people's gold, he handed it over to the Federal Reserve, at which time was priced at about $20.67 per ounce. When he gave the gold to the Federal Reserve, he then said, okay, we are going to revalue gold to $35 an ounce. So being that the Federal Reserve was mandated to be backed up by 40% gold, him revaluating gold from $20 to $35 gave him an additional around 60 or so percent of money that he could print out of thin air and put out into the economy. So he stole the people's gold, right? And the reason I say he stole is because as soon as he stole it, he revaluated it. So in all effect, he stole the people's labor. He used the people's gold to fund their labor. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can wrap your mind around that, about how sinister that is. Well, back then, pretty much overnight, the price of everything went up by about 65%. Why? Because the dollar was backed up by gold back then. We were in a gold standard back then, where the Federal Reserve note was backed up by gold. So if gold was valued at a higher nominal rate, that means that everything else is going to cost more. So pretty much from one day to the other, the people found themselves paying a whole bunch more for the way that they could live. Do you think that that can happen again today? It doesn't have to be the same thing. I'm not saying that the government is going to confiscate gold or restrict people's ownership of gold or silver or anything like that. They could, but I'm not saying that that can happen. It could be anything that happens. We're at the midst of the end of a cycle, right? And this monetary cycle, this financial cycle that we've been living through for the last 100 or so years, a little longer than that, is at its end. And we will enter into a new one. Well, what will be the catalyst for us to enter into that new cycle? Many people can say A, B, or C, but we really don't know what it will be. But are you prepared for that? And the reason that I'm saying that we have about 6 weeks left, it's that we have about 6 weeks left to find out whether the catalyst will appear itself in the BRICS nations joining in August and discussing about a new currency. Not a new world currency, not a new currency that's going to take over all the other currencies. I've come to realize that it doesn't really matter if you hold the world reserve currency. In the US dollar is the world reserve currency, not just for us, but for everyone else around the world. But it's been diminishing year after year after year. Right now, I think we're only at about 58, 57% of other countries that are using the world reserve currency, which is the Federal Reserve note. We can still be called the world reserve currency, but how much value will it have? So it's not really the number of countries that are joining in, it's the number of people that it actually makes up, the number of people that need services, that need manufactured consumer items. That's what really matters, because that is what takes dollars and other currencies to buy. So the more of the Earth's population that are joined into these BRICS currency and the BRICS unit of value, or whatever they come up with here in August, the more that are in there, the less that the dollar is going to be needed, less value being put on the dollar. We need to prepare not only with things that are tangible like food, water, electrical backup, fuel, medicine, but we also need to prepare to preserve the labor that it took for us to earn what we nowadays call money, i.e. fiat currency. All right, ladies and gentlemen, some people, they don't have anything to preserve, right? Because they just don't have any money. They're just hanging on day to day, right? Or week to week, or paycheck to paycheck. But if you are one of those that have extra money, that have extra labor that you compressed into a note or a coin, put away. This is the time that you need to preserve it. You need to start thinking about preserving that. Why? Because that is going to hold its value just like it has throughout the history of mankind. It's held its purchasing power time and time again through crisis after crisis after crisis, and through defaults after defaults after defaults. Not one fiat currency in the history of mankind that has never gone to zero. They all have. But gold and silver, ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, and it's a fact, it has never gone to zero, and in my opinion, never will go to zero until the day that the earth no longer exists. It will always have some value, always. So get ready for it, because 41 countries are ready to accept the BRICS currency a month before the summit. Now, the BRICS nations are going to have a summit here in August, sometime in August, and there's already 40 or so countries ready to accept whatever currency it is that they've been working on. And that's now, a month and a half or so before their summit. But some of the countries that are standing in line now should worry us Western nations, ladies and gentlemen. The list of countries ready to join the BRICS alliance and accept the new currency is growing. From a set of 19 countries in April, the numbers have spiked to 41 by the end of June. A total of 22 new countries expressed interest to enter the bloc and ditch the US dollar in 2 months. This is a very big deal. This is something we must prepare for. But AP, how can I prepare for it if I don't have any extra money? Get a second job, ladies and gentlemen. That is as blunt as I possibly can be. Get a side gig. You have a car, do Dash, do Uber, do whatever it is that you need to do a side gig. The thing is that, in my opinion, I'm not a financial advisor, all right? But this is my opinion, and I think it's an educated opinion, is that you don't need much. In the entire world, above ground silver is about 3.5 billion ounces. Let's say 4 billion. In the entire world, above ground silver, meaning silver that you can actually hold right now. This is part of the above ground silver in the world, right? This 3/4 of an ounce, roughly 3/4 of an ounce, so about 0.72, right? So in the entire world, there's 3.5 billion, let's say, right? Or 4 billion ounces. How many people are there in the world? 8 billion. That means that right now, if you took all of the silver in the entire world and divvied it up amongst every human in the entire world, each human being would have 1/2 ounce or less of silver. So when people say, well, I just can't go out there and buy silver all the time. Can you afford a $2 or $3 silver dime once a week or once a payday? Let's say that you got paid every week and you did that every week, every payday, by a silver dime. That's 50 silver dimes a week. Now, instead of having made that excuse for the last 5 years, right now you could have been sitting on 250, 300, and 300 or so silver dimes. If you would have been doing that for the last 5 years or so, every time you got paid. If you get paid every 2 weeks, go get 2 silver dimes, $10, right? Or go get a side gig where you can make an extra 40, 50 bucks a week or 40, 50 bucks a month. That's 10 silver dimes or 20 silver dimes a month, depending on what the spot price is and premium. I'm not a financial advisor, but the folks at Genesis Gold Group specialize in helping those who want to diversify their excess wealth by converting their fiat currency retirement plans into a plan that is backed by real money. So if you're in a position where you are wondering what you can do in order to diversify or insulate your wealth against what I like to call the inferno of inflation, give Genesis Gold Group a call and they can provide you with the information that you need in order to make an educated decision. Once again, thank you very much, Genesis Gold Group, for sponsoring this video. Ladies and gentlemen, there's always a way, and I say that you really don't need that much, right? Because I believe that silver has been suppressed in value so much over the last 150 years or so that when it goes, it's going to really go. And not only is it going to retain its purchasing power, but it's going to give you additional purchasing power than what you actually put into it because it's been manipulated so much. The next BRICS summit is going to be held this August in South Africa, where the bloc of 5 nations will combinedly decide the formation of a new currency. Ladies and gentlemen, this is coming. This is what we've been talking about for years, right? For years, and at the beginning, 6, 7 years ago, everyone would call you conspiracy theories about the CBDC. They would call you conspiracy theories about the BRICS nations joining together and making their own currency. The thing is that the East, unlike the West, they practice what's called delayed gratification. They take their time doing things. And what they've done here is they've compiled already, in my opinion, about half of the world. About half of the world is in on this. That means that half of the world is only going to use dollars when they need to use dollars. And it's why it's so important that the United States of America gets back to manufacturing. I believe that in the end, we are going to go back to a full manufacturing nation. Unfortunately, by that time, our dollar will have been devalued so much that people will be eating hand to mouth. Now listen to this. These are some of the countries that are not part of the BRICS nations yet, but have interest in joining in, and I believe will join in. Here we go. The countries that have shown interest to join the BRICS alliance, Argentina is one of them, all right? Mexico, ladies and gentlemen. A huge one that I highlighted in red, Saudi Arabia. That's a huge deal. UAE is another one. And one that is not on here that I think I've got pin marked for another article here is France. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. France. All right. Africa is interested in BRICS and not the US dollar for global trade. And you've probably all heard about this, that the Kenyan president here on a speech that he did not too long ago urged African nations to stop using the US dollar and trade with native currencies within the continent. So the continent of Africa is pretty big. Yeah, it's pretty poor, but I believe that the reason that it is so poor, is because the management of its natural resources have been mismanaged for all of these years, ladies and gentlemen. And I believe that when they start trading amongst each other and they realize that they can keep a lot of their own country's wealth within their borders by trading with their own currencies, that they will do it, and they will continue to do it, and they will ditch the dollar. So there are many countries in Africa, but all of those countries put together makes up a pretty good chunk of how many dollars are used throughout the world. Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Brazil pay in Chinese yuan and ditch the US dollar. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has warned that many countries are settling trade with the Chinese yuan and ditching the US dollar for cross-border transactions. Now, many people think that there has to be a new world reserve currency in order for the dollar to be dethroned. I believe that the dollar doesn't have to be dethroned as the world reserve currency. It just has to be devalued. We can call the dollar the world reserve currency forever, but how much value does it have, ladies and gentlemen? That's the question. How much value will it have? How much of your standard of living will diminish in the value of the US dollar when all of these other currencies are going to be used instead of the US dollar for international trade? That's the question that we really ought to be asking, because that's what's going to affect us the most. That is what's going to affect your standard of living the most. That is what's going to affect, in actuality, our security, our national security. Because the less that you can buy with dollars, either the more that they print and the less that your standard of living will be, or the less that they'll be able to spend on military. And although I don't believe in having a huge standing military as part of being a sovereign nation, I don't really believe in that, because you should be peaceful with all of your other brother and sister nations around the world. We live in a time where we need to have a strong military, more of a deterrent other than an offensive tool. In my opinion, of course, but I digress. This article, I believe I covered years ago when it first came out. This is from July 24th of 2017. IMF could be based in Beijing in a decade, says Lagarde, and she used to be the IMF head, the head of the IMF. I believe she's the ECB chief, the chief of the ECB or something like that. But back then she used to be the head of the IMF. In 2027, they plan on moving over from the United States, the IMF that is, to Beijing. Right? I'm not a big fan of the IMF, but it just shows you where the tide is going. Okay, so I did have this pin. French President Emmanuel Macron to attend the summit in August, the BRICS summit that is. So we even have leaders of Western nations attending this BRICS summit. Ladies and gentlemen, the writing is on the wall. The writing's been on the wall for a long time, but now it's on the wall even more so for you to be able to see with your eyes where we are headed. We have to prepare for a lower standard of living. And if you don't want to have a lower standard of living going forward, you're going to have to prepare on how you can maintain your standard of living. How can you keep what you have now, as far as the labor that you've stored up in paper bills or in bonds or in stocks, whatever it is? How can you maintain that to a point where your standard of living will not be diminished when the value of the dollar goes down? This is another interesting article. What could happen if Europe accepts the new currency from the BRICS? Accepting BRICS currency could signal a shift in Europe's geopolitical alliance and economic partnerships. It could indicate a desire for closer ties with emerging economies and a reduced reliance on traditional economic powers like the US and Canada. Meaning that the US will be like a Walmart that has less customers. If a Walmart has less customers, what happens to Walmart's stock price? It goes down. What pretty much defines the United States of America around the world, ladies and gentlemen? I believe two things. All right, correct me if you think I'm wrong. The U.S. military, number one, and number two, the U.S. dollar, the Federal Reserve note. All right, so if less people need Walmart, the stock price goes down. If less people around the world need the dollar's price or value goes down as well. A common currency could potentially boost trade and investment between Europe and the BRICS countries. With a unified currency, it may become easier and more cost-effective to conduct business, leading to increased economic collaboration and exchange of goods and services. This could reduce the demand for the dollar, potentially leading to a depreciation of its value, what I just talked about, ladies and gentlemen. This writing is on the wall, and we need to prepare for this. It's why I've been talking about this so much, because it's getting closer. I'm not saying that our lives are going to change in August when they have this summit or this meeting that they're having. I'm not saying that it's going to change from one day to another. Unfortunately, and this is a very hard truth to swallow, this is why I believe that the United States government is so hell-bent on starting a war. Because they need a war. The U.S. government needs a war in order for them to stay in power of not the world, but in order for them to stay in power of their own people. Because remember, in the last 2.5 years, the government says that our inflation is only about 18% in the last 2.5 years. What do you think the government can do against a people whose inflation goes up 30 or 40% from one day to another, or from 1 month to another? should an event like a new BRICS currency coming out and half of the world adopting it happens? What do you think the government's going to do about them? They're not going to do anything. They're not going to be able to do anything. They will lose control. In my opinion, there probably could be martial law if that were to happen. Whenever you have to use 40% or more of what you bring home from work just for food, people get angry. It's something that's been studied in other countries, and whenever you have to use 40% or more of your income just to feed your family, people start to get angry and they start to do bad things on the streets. You think that bad things on the streets are happening now? And we've only had 18%, right? Inflation in the last 2.5 years. Imagine if the official number is 30-40% from one month to the other. That's the official number, right? Because the official number right now is 18 in the last 2.5-3 years. Imagine if it was 30 or 40% from one month to another. That's what we're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, if this happens. Iraq bans US dollar. Egypt ditches USD. France and Pakistan pay with Chinese yuan. In another recent update, Egypt will settle trade with China, Russia, and India using native currencies of the respective nations. Egypt will pay the Russian ruble to settle trade with Russia and pay with the Chinese yuan for business with China. Similarly, it will pay the Indian rupee while paying for goods and services conducted with India. The US dollar could no longer play a role in cross-border transactions amongst these nations. Again, the US dollar is not going to disappear, because if Egypt wants to do business with the United States of America, guess what they're going to have to need? They're going to need US dollars to pay whatever business they're doing business with in the US, right? So it's not going to disappear, ladies and gentlemen. It's just going to be devalued, and that's what we have to prepare for. In addition, France became the first European nation to ditch the US dollar for LNG gas trade with China. France settled the payment by paying with Chinese yuan and not the dollar. The move marked a shift in global transactions, and Western economies are now paying with the local currencies of BRICS nations. What's the ironic part here? That France is buying LNG from China, that China is buying from Russia. Often said that sanctions only hurt the people, not the people that actually put the sanctions in place. They are going to do a BRICS nations games of 2024 to kind of like mimic that of the Olympic Games. So the BRICS nations are pretty much creating their own world aside from the world that the West is involved in. They are pretty much saying, oh, okay, you don't want to let our athletes participate in the Olympics? We'll make our own Olympics. Oh, you want to sanction us and steal the money that we had in our world, reserves? Okay, we'll build our own money. It doesn't matter whether you agree on sanctions or whether you agree or not on people being banned from the Olympics because of what country they're in. It doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen. These are all emotions that people get triggered on. What really matters is what? Is how well can you take care of your family? How well can you support your family? How well will you be able to feed your family in the future when your labor is going to be worth half of what it is worth now? Just like that of what happened back in 1933, 34, 35, etc. People's labor was diminished by about half when the dollar was revalued or when gold was revalued. Their labor was diminished by about half, meaning that they can now get about half as much as what they got before for their labor in actual real things, tangible things. So as the East shifts away from the West, so will the dependence that those countries had on needing the United States Federal Reserve note in order to interact internationally, all right, with other countries. They won't have that need anymore, which will mean that the dollar's value is going to continue to go down, all right, just because of that. Nothing else with inflation that we're causing here inside of our own nation. Having said that, this video is probably about 1 million hours too long. But I want to thank you very much if you're still here, and I want to tell you that you need to prepare, ladies and gentlemen. Do your own research. Look all of this stuff up, and if you think that I'm crazy, that's fine. Then don't prep for it, But if you think that there's some validity in the fact that the dollar's value is only got one way to go, and that's down, all right, over time. Right? The dollar's value only has one way to go, and that's down. And when I say value, I mean it's real value. It's purchasing power. Now, how much is valued against other Western currencies or other currencies, period. It's real value. How much can you buy with it? Have a great day. God bless every one of you. Again, belated happy 4th of July. God bless America. God bless all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Alaska Prepper. I'm out.